Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jenny Beal, for the Living in Not Knowing section of the Awareness podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Rachna Chowla, who I met about 8 years ago at one of Rupert Spira's retreats. And we're going to talk about openness and spontaneity. Hi, Rachna.
Hi, Jenny. Lovely to be with you.
Lovely to have you here. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about Rachna. Rachna is a doctor by day, a poet by night, and a truth lover all of the time. And both of those activities are underpinned by an understanding of the non-dual nature of reality and a recognition that we share our being with everyone and everything. And she was initially drawn towards a traditional Vedanta path, and in her late 20s, she attended a Vedanta school which focused mainly on the intellectual aspects of Advaita Vedanta. While working in Milan, she attended meetings with the Dalai Lama and developed an interest in Buddhism. And that brought about two significant glimpses and a longing for a teaching that took her towards a deeper meaning. However, some of this meaning she could already touch when reading the love poems of Rumi. And after returning to the UK, she began to feel that the Vedanta path she'd been following was too structured and didn't properly take account of the love, beauty, freedom, and spontaneity that is our inherent nature. And by chance, a friend mentioned Rupert Spira, and after watching many of his videos, she attended his meeting in London and instantly recognized that she'd found her teacher. She attended Rupert's retreats for several years, and with Rupert's encouragement, her poetry blossomed. She went on also to meet Francis Lucille, her other teacher, and she continues to deepen her understanding with them, as well as through the teaching that is writing poetry itself. So Rachna, I'd like to start by exploring your spiritual path a little further. So you were brought up in a Hindu household. Did you have any kind of spiritual experiences or intimations of something beyond the ordinary as a child or teenager?
You know, it's only since I've become much more interested in spirituality and developed an understanding of it in my later years that I can now look back and say that, yes, maybe I did. There were two instances. One where I was a child and we were living in Nigeria at the time. And I remember that my parents had taken me to the house of two of their friends. He was an architect and she was also an architect, and they lived in this lovely house with big windows and all of this light coming in from, you know, the fauna of what lives in Ibadan, the city that we used to live in. And he showed me some of the pictures that he'd drawn of his wife, and they were so beautiful, Jenny. They were hand-drawn, penciled pictures. But see, my sense of the appreciation was just, it was more than, oh, that's a pretty drawing that's quite accurate of your wife. You know, I didn't think that as a child. I was taken by something deeper within, you know, the lead lines of the pencil meeting the page. And in particular, something around how he'd drawn her hair is my memory. So I still remember that now, and I would have been about 4 or 5. You know, I would have been a tiny child. So there's that one instance. But it's only now, after having this great love and interest in non-duality, that I can look back and appreciate that. Yes. And the second was probably in my late teens, when my grandparents, my mother's parents, who were big devotees of an Indian saint called Sai Baba from Shirdi. So there are 2 Sai Babas. He's the first Sai Baba. And they wanted to take me to Shirdi, which is, I can't remember where it is in India, a little bit further south. And we went on this long train journey. It was almost a pilgrimage. And my grandmother wanted to take me there. And we were sitting in the satsang hall, And I don't normally enjoy bhajans or Indian devotional singing, but I was taken away by something about the bells or the place or all of it together. And so, that there were these two things that kind of, I remember now, and at the time I felt them, I was touched by them, but I didn't understand them fully.
Yes, yeah. I think that's so common for of childhood experiences, isn't it? You just don't understand until later, and then you understand. Yes, beauty is not in the objects. Yeah. So then later in your 20s, you joined a Vedanta school. What were you looking for when you joined that organization?
So I was definitely looking for answers. The context had been that my mum had been quite unwell, and so it had been a difficult time. And so I was looking for answers to understand myself and life better. I think I also might have been looking for a husband because I was in my late 20s, and
you weren't very successful in that.
I'm so pleased. The wonder about the non-dual path is I fell in love with myself and with everything else, and so I'm so glad that I failed in that endeavor. But that's really the hidden reason. If I look back now, and I'm happy to say that now. But I should also say that, once I started going, certainly in my late 20s, I was still quite academic, still doing all of these other medical exams. I love the study aspect of going through, there's a book called Self-Unfoldment, and going through that with my friends who were there. It was fun. It definitely had an intellectual feel to it, though we would, I think, try and apply it to our lives. It's very different to what I really love and benefit from now on the non-dual path. But at the time, it really did suit me.
It's interesting because you must have been still studying medicine at that point, weren't you? And
Yeah.
so huge amount of study, absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I'd finished medicine but we always have to be doing exams. So I was doing some postgraduate exam or another.
Yes.
And maybe that's why it suited me then, because I was still in the pursuit of something, academic and that needed intellectual rigor and trying to understand it with my mind rather than a different sort of understanding, which I didn't know how to appreciate really at the time.
Yes. I think maybe when we're young, we want certainty, don't we? And intellectual study gives us that kind of certainty and tells us how to find that certainty for ourselves. And then it's only later that we discover that certainty is founded on sand. Yes. And then you attended the Dalai Lama's meetings, which must have been utterly different and totally amazing. What was that like?
Yeah, they were completely different. And the story is it was all by chance. It was all spontaneous, Jenny. I was in Milan, my second year in Milan, and I just saw these big posters that he was coming. And these were not small meetings. It was in the big stadium in the south of Milan. So there were 10,000 people.
Wow.
I very quickly got a day off work, which perhaps I wasn't allowed to have or whatever, but I was just drawn to going. I had to go. And I went into this big stadium. It's a place where they have pop concerts. It's that big and it was that crowded. I found my place and I sat down, and I was very, very far from the stage. And I spontaneously started crying, and I don't quite know why. And this Italian lady next to me put her hand on mine and said, "Oh, that's just what happens. Don't worry."
Oh.
She'd clearly been before and understood that. And His Holiness came on stage, and it's a very structured teaching. So he speaks. One thing I do note about him is that when he laughs with his entire being. You can feel it. And even though there were 10,000 people, I felt something there. It was really the following day where he was doing the there was some kind of ceremony that he did that I did not understand because it was in Tibetan. You know, I read the description of it, but he was chanting something and ringing bells, and I had these moments of just utter fullness, and I noticed them as something different at the time. I'd never experienced anything like that before, and for a few maybe moments or minutes, there was a definite understanding that there was a distance between me and my thoughts. Definitely, you know, there was no doubt for me around that, and even some sense of choice. And I thought nothing of it, and you know, carried on with my day. It was a 2-day teaching, and I thought it had been a wonderful 2 days, and I thought nothing of it. But I think for me, you know, that had been some kind of a glimpse. What I did do afterwards, quite quickly, was decide that staying in Italy in my job was not something I wanted to do, and I made some rather rash, maybe spontaneous decisions. I'm not sure. not knowing what I was coming back to in the UK, but I knew that I wasn't meant to stay there, and I resigned very quickly and came back. And interestingly, on my goodbye tour to my friends in Italy, I went to Florence and to Rome and Napoli to say goodbye to friends. And I had another lovely experience in Florence. I was sitting in a rose garden on the south side of the Arno. And Florence is beautiful anyway, what's there to say? But there was this seamless stitching together of everything in my experience in a way, again, that I had never experienced before. And I didn't know what it was at the time because I just enjoyed it and I carried on. But for me, those two experiences felt quite linked to the teaching of His Holiness in Milan.
Yes, yeah. And I guess it was so different from the Vedanta teaching that there wasn't really an obvious connection between the two, and that was something I found when I first had a glimpse. It didn't make any sense in terms of the Vedanta teaching that I'd been following.
Yes, completely, because especially the second glimpse, because it was a glimpse of utter beauty, just utter seamless, deep beauty that touched everything and everyone that was there. I mean, everyone that was there within whatever this thing that was happening within me, or I can't describe that. I didn't know at the time what it was, and it's only afterwards that I started to even make the connection.
Yes. So you came back to the UK, and you did for a while go back to your Vedanta school, didn't you, at that point?
Yes, I did, because I was still searching.
Yes.
And
you're still searching for a husband, or you still
no. I think I was searching for something more. And I think there was a sense of security still in that Vedanta school, because I had friends there and I'd enjoyed it when I'd gone back before. But this time when I'd gone back, I'd outgrown something there, I'd changed. And but I was still searching. And you mentioned Rumi. Some of the meeting of Rumi happened whilst I was leaving Italy, and so there was something in there for me also that I didn't quite understand. There was this, I would fall between his words. I would be taken away, but there was no explanation for that. I couldn't find that explanation in Vedanta, and so I was sort of still seeking, but not knowing what I was seeking for or where I should go.
Yes, and that was the point which, just by chance, as these things happen, you were told about Rupert Svara, and you looked into what he provided.
Yes, Jenny, it was so by chance. It was so by chance. I was going on a volunteer day for the Vedanta school to go and clear up some garden, and I couldn't get there because I didn't have a car. So they put me in touch randomly with someone who lived near enough to give me a lift. I'd never met this lady before. We're now friends. And we became instant friends in the car. And as we were driving up, she mentioned the name of many teachers, but the one that stuck was Rupert's name.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, onto YouTube, like everyone does. And
Yes.
I didn't understand everything at the beginning. I'd have to pause and rewind and listen to things again and again, but there was something there for me. And then, yes, one day I went to one of his meetings, and when I was there, it was a different knowing of, oh, I've sort of arrived somewhere important. I've arrived home. I want to be here. That was the feeling, yeah.
And then after that, you went to a number of his retreats, because that's where we met. Was that your first retreat when we met? I think it may have been.
Yes. Yes, because I called you bright-eyed Jenny. I remember that. Yeah, that was in 2014 in Buckland Hall.
Yes. I think it was his first one in Buckland Hall. Previously, it was in other places. Yeah. So what change did that bring about in you? That change to his direct path teaching?
Yeah, at the time, I if you'd asked me that, I wouldn't have been able to answer that question. I can tell you what I so enjoyed about the retreats at the time, and then maybe I'll tell you about what change it's brought about. I love the beingness of being there with everyone during the meditations, during the dialogues. And it's again only now that I can say that was different to what I'd experienced before in teachings. And it had a similar kind of feel to this fullness that I'd felt when, I'd had that sort of glimpse after His Holiness's teachings.
Yes.
And there's a sweetness there that you just want to keep going back to again and again and again. The people, of course, the teaching and Rupert and the meditations, but all of it. And the change, I think, in a very slow but lovely way, it's changed everything for me. I'm a different person to who I was then. I'm much more open to all sorts of things. I grew up I was educated in a scientific way, which we tend to boil things down into almost binary things sometimes, even though I think that's really the point of science. And so I kind of learned to embrace the grayness that exists around all sorts of things. So there was definitely an openness. For me, the inclusion of feelings and the inclusion of the body within the teaching and of love and of beauty has been so important to me. It would be dry without it. It just wouldn't resonate, actually, if they weren't there. And the appreciation of those has sort of come along in a very natural way. And I think the poems have somehow helped.
Because you were writing poetry a little bit before you went to Rupert, weren't you? But then you started writing an awful lot more after that.
More. And the poetry before, if I look back, it had this, it was all love poems. It was very sticky, honey sticky. And I would write in rhyme, no kind of, even the poems have become much more free. I'm much more, I just express what's there, no matter how intimate. I would kind of limit that before, worry about what people might think. All of those things have gone. I just share it as it is. And I think through the teaching, through the poems, this understanding that they're not mine. And if they're not mine and they come through me, well, what is mine? Mine, who do we mean mine? These sorts of questions then came up.
Yes, I think I mean, it's that softer side, the love and beauty, which is very much missing from the traditional Vedanta teaching. That was what I found too. And certainly anything to do with the body, was missing.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So you, for the last 2 or 3 years, maybe even longer, you've attended an awful lot of Francis Lucille's meetings and retreats. Recently, almost everything, I think.
I think I might be a bit in love there, yes.
So what attracts you to his expression of the direct path?
Again, it sort of happened a little bit by chance. I'd been to see Francis in 2016 and 2017, and I loved the 2 retreats I went to, but I don't think I was quite ready for it, actually. And then COVID came about, 2020, and Francis started doing the retreats, or doing some kind of satsang every day, which was a joy and a place of just quietness in the midst of what was a difficult and turbulent time. But it became increasingly a place of just joy and connection. And for me, my questions came up in a way that they hadn't come up before. And questions to do with the teaching, but also the application of the teaching in my life. And I think with Francis, because he has this scientific background, it sort of appealed to my scientific background, which is why I think I'd made Vedanta an academic pursuit. But here he is applying it in a very, in an experiential way. But then there's also the inclusion of literature and physics, and I've learned more about maths and physics in these 2 or 3 years than I learned at school, and culture in a way that I've never been exposed to, and art, and all sorts of things. So I can't say why it I sort of really fell into it this time in 2020, and I didn't in 2016. I don't know, but yes, I was struck by my own questions. I was struck by how many were coming up, because before I'd in some way, and maybe I just enjoyed the being of the beingness of the being at the retreat so much that the questions didn't come up. But I enjoy the beingness, and when questions come up, they bubble up, and I ask them.
Freedom and spontaneity, and yes, absolutely. But Francis places an awful lot of emphasis on not knowing, which is something very different from Rupert's teaching. Does that mean anything to you? Is that important for you?
I'm learning about this, I think, more and more, in terms of what it means to me. From the perspective of the poems definitely come from a place of not knowing. I really don't know anything about a poem. I have a blank piece of paper on my computer, and I have no idea how or where or what's going to come out and what it's going to look like and feel like, or what the shape will be. So I've sort of had an appreciation of that through the poems for a while.
Yes,
But I want to try and live my life from that, and I think that's something that I'm learning. And there are moments, in my day where I'll remember, just remember not knowing, and then there's a sort of going back, which I think communicates itself in some ways. On Friday, I was in clinic and it was a difficult encounter, and I think if I'd had that encounter 5 years ago, I would have just burst into tears. That's what I would have done. And this time I didn't, because there was something holding me, or I was holding myself. And there was no judgment towards anyone, and certainly not towards, what was happening in the room. And there was some kind of understanding that this is how it is, and it's happening in the moment. And of course, as a doctor in the room, there are things that I have to do, but I guess I didn't take it into myself in the way that I would have before, in a way that would have then made me react to then behave in a way that perhaps wouldn't have been so helpful. Yes. So yes, there was this moment on Friday where I think something did come from well, actually.
Well, that was with a patient.
With with a patient and their partner. Yeah.
Were they abusive towards you?
They were definitely upset. Not towards me, but in general because of the situation. I understand that.
Yes.
I think some of it was perhaps a little bit personalized because of the situation. But again, I'm putting the emphasis more on the situation, the culmination of everything that was happening in that room, rather than what I would have done 5 years ago, which is this person said something to me and I therefore got upset. It's not there. The sensation still came up in my body, but I know what these sensations are now because of all of the yoga meditations and the teaching, and I let them work their way, and they stayed with me for Friday, and then they're not there now. But what would have happened 5 years ago would have been the ruminating thoughts would have continued, and Jenny, today our conversation might have been about something else,
Yes.
so that's different. You said to me at the beginning, what's changed with the non-dual teaching? It's things like that have changed, and
yes,
I don't quite know how all of this happened or happens in the background, but there's change happening. I can feel it and I can see it. I can see my automatons, before sometimes the sail is unfurled, it's too late, and I have to apologize, and sometimes I can see the sail unfurling and I can kind of just hold it there, but I can see things more now about myself.
Well, in general, I mean, not just with abusive patients, but day to day, the patients you see and the work that you do. How does the non-dual teaching apply to that? When you've got to come to a diagnosis, you've got to communicate with them. You're healing. Ultimately, we hope you're healing them. It's because your training as a doctor. It's as you said, it's very scientific. It's very cut and dried, matter of fact, and there's I guess a set of protocols that you go through when you're trying to diagnose something. Is there any room for that sort of openness and spontaneity that we get from living in not knowing?
I think it needs to sit underneath everything that we do in a consultation room, because the sort of global listening that John Klein talks about is where everything starts in terms of how we meet our patients, especially now with masks on. There's a lot of communication that sort of happens through the eyes, and then through me really allowing someone to speak and listening with all of me to what they're saying. And I think when we listen in that way, we don't jump to our traditional medical conclusions too quickly, and we allow space for the other person to also be open to things that perhaps they weren't going to say, because that often happens. You know, someone will come in with a rash and then they'll tell you really about what's happening at home and what's difficult, and actually that's what they've come with. So if I close the conversation too quickly, we'll just stay at the rash, at the superficial thing. And so I think I'm learning to appreciate that more. There's definitely space for it, and I think it does communicate itself, especially when other people are going through a difficult time, and you somehow there's a communication of by listening that you're being with them, and I think there's that feeling on their side as well, and whether they feel that as a being together or just, you know, this person's with me, they'll be here to support me. Well, that's fine, but we need to make space for it, because I think it underlies everything that then happens in a consultation room.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine there must be a lot of factors, particularly in the political environment at the moment in healthcare, which make working as a medic particularly difficult compared with a lot of other professions, and really very stressful. So how do you cope with that, having to see so many patients a day? I'm horrified in reading in the media about how many patients GPs have to actually see in a day.
Yeah, I have a great deal of respect and admiration for my colleagues who do much more clinical time than I do. Because in truth, Jenny, I wasn't able to cope with that volume, which is why, not just because of that, but many years ago, my interests were also a little bit more diverse. That, you know, my working life is really a mixture of many different things, all within healthcare, and still seeing patients. So that's one way that I learned to cope. But certainly when I'm there on a clinic day, I think having an understanding of this teaching keeps me grounded, you know, like it did on Friday. I didn't get carried away with, this person said something to me, you know, that thought didn't even come up. There was just a very peaceful, calm understanding of, this is what is arising right now, and what is my role in this, and how can I help, rather than being triggered, which is what would have happened. So I think this teaching has a role to play in helping us. I think before I've spoken to you about how it would help me really connect with patients, especially my palliative care patients, with whom we have much more time. But for me on Friday, it was the first time where, you know, I connected almost with patients on the other end of the spectrum, where there was a conflict there in the room. And I don't know if we resolved the conflict, but I didn't feel conflicted. I wasn't holding anything within myself when the consultation came to an end. I had tried my best, and I hadn't tried my best to protect myself or anything like that as a doctor. It was okay, what's really the best thing here to do? And so there was a difference there.
An openness to let the situation come, and then let the situation go when the patient walked out. Yes.
And with you know, the intention of just, I'm trying to do my best. I really hope that, you know, things get better. I mean, we want everyone to be well in the end, you know.
Yes, but that's not always possible, is it? I guess the patients don't always help themselves in the best way possible.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and you know, I see that even differently now, because the other thing that came about was, I really understood last week when I went to the Paris retreat, of when there's you can call it a conflict, or someone who does something that is different to what I would have done. It's just an expression of freedom. Yes. It's really an expression of freedom. So even when it wasn't the case with this patient that they weren't doing everything to help themselves, they were, But even when that's not the case, it's just an expression of freedom.
I'm going to go on smoking.
Well, but if there's an openness there for someone to talk about it, happily have the conversation, of course. But from a very different place to what I would have done before, which is, you must do this. This is really very bad for you. I think there's something for doctors about explaining the facts as they are, because that's part of being transparent. But in order for, I think it's important for the therapeutic relationship for the doctor and the patient, or the nurse and the patient, to always meet. And that place of meeting has to be in some kind of understanding. So if I go in with my "you must do this, you must do that," when it's not been invited, it's just going to fall on a closed door. And so that's where the relationship underneath is one that's really important. And especially if I'm coming from a place of not knowing, I think that sort of communicates itself.
Yes. And I guess there's a kind of opportunity between patients to just go back into silence, to kind of recoup your energies in some way. Is that something that works, or do you have to keep writing notes rapidly before the next one turns up?
For me to go back into silence, or for them,
for you too.
For me, sometimes it can be half a minute or something like that. But sometimes that's enough.
It's timeless, isn't it? That place is timeless.
Yeah. And even just at the end of a consultation, and to close my eyes and just to feel what's left of my body as wispy clouds that are changing and moving, and seeing all of them, all of that as body sensations, and whatever I'm hearing, just in some way step back, even for a few moments. That can help.
Yes. And you also work outside a sort of clinical setting with in teams with other medics, don't you? Sort of working on projects and things. Has the teaching been helpful in that area of your work? I think
it grounds me, so I don't get carried away with, there are dramas in life everywhere, aren't there? Whether it's at home with family or friends, or at work. And I think I don't get carried away with the sort of normal life dramas in the same way as I used to. I do sometimes still. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee, but less so. And I think sometimes by not getting carried away, maybe I can support people better. Yes. There's sort of something for them to hold on to, the silence or whatever. But yes, I think that's the best way of saying it. Without me intentionally, it's not an intention that I want to support someone better. You kind of want to do that anyway, but by not getting involved in, sometimes, we can all end up being involved in circular conversations and things. And by stepping back, it's easy to see, well, actually, we've gone through that ground. What have we decided? Or, I think some of that can come a little bit from being in this place. And the other thing is the openness. In medicine, we need, and healthcare, we need so much more openness for new ideas and new innovations, and not doing things how we've always done. And I'm lucky enough to be on a program that is designed to be, in that sense, open to new ideas. And so I love how these two things have aligned. Yes. Again, just by luck. Yes.
As Francis always says, the best thing is if you can find if you need to work, you need money, then find, if you can, something that you really love to do. And I always loved working in teams with, especially with people from different backgrounds to me, in different skill sets, and somehow or other there is a lovely openness which can develop, can't it, in those circumstances?
Definitely. I love diversity in teams, and I feel very lucky with the different teams that I work with in these 2 or 3 organizations. I'm very lucky, not just in terms of the people, but also the type of work that we're doing. There is definitely a sense of, you can plan to some extent, but because of the nature of the work, we have to be open to new opportunities or new ideas or doing things in a different way. So I feel very lucky.
It needs creativity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The NHS, health service in Britain, needs a lot of creativity at the moment, I think. Yes.
Yeah.
So turning to your poetry writing, very, very different activity, and obviously that's mostly outside work, mostly in the evenings. Do you allow time for the poems to come to you? Do they sort of suddenly come spontaneously while you're preparing a meal, or how does it work?
You know what, it can be any which way now, Jenny. There are times. So I was in Paris last week with Francis on a two-day retreat, and I knew at the time that there was just so much different sensory input from being in Paris, and it being summertime, and then the meditations and everything, that something would culminate. I now know not to force something, and that I will know when it's time to write. And Thursday I was finishing an email, and then I just started writing, and something came about which was a little bit my reflection of the 2 days in Paris. And so it can come about like that. Sometimes I'm doing something else, and I have this almost urge within my body that a poem is about to come out, almost as if I'm about to give birth. And it happened once where I literally ran down the stairs with my laptop, and I sat down, and that's when I just closed my eyes and I wait, and then something came forth. And I think that poem that time was called the grand multip of poems, or something like that. Grand multip means a woman who's had many children. And so they can come along in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes someone will give me 2 or 3 words. They'll just say something, and for some reason I'll catch them, and they'll turn up at some point. Sometimes I'll start a poem and on my blue sofa, which I think during COVID did become some kind of practice, because we'd sit there every day with Francis, and then we'd finish, and then I'd be in this place or space where I was open, and there was a lot of poetry that came out during that year or 2 years. And when I'm working on a book, the poems don't come so often. So there is something about me when I'm working on the technical aspects of the book, it's hard to kind of be in the space to create. They still come, but not at the same rate.
Yes.
So it's a whole mixture of everything. But what I've learned is to not get anxious when they're not coming, because they're not mine, they visit me, to not try and force them to come to a completion. So if I've written a poem and I know it's not finished, it will finish itself in its own time, or it might not, and they're both fine. So I just save them in my drafts folder, and who knows? I don't know. I think that's the thing. I don't know.
And suddenly there'll be an impulse to go back to a poem, perhaps.
Yeah. Suddenly there'll be an impulse to go back and check my drafts folder from 2 years ago, and be really caught by these few lines, and then something comes forth, and then something else might come forth, and so there's no grasping anymore to finish. There's no it would almost be violent if I wanted to do that, and I don't. I really they have their own life. I've really learned to kind of respect that, and it's a lovely teaching in itself.
Yes. So they really come from a place of not knowing. It's not from Rachna. It's
I'm
from
always
the
the last to know. So and they sorry, I was going to say, and they surprise me. I'm surprised by them when I read them after a while. I think, how did those words, how did they get put together? And now they're here. I mean, there's a joy in me rereading them afterwards, even though they came through me. And it's such a, that's why that's when I understood they're not mine. They're not mine. That's why I can enjoy reading them again and again.
Yes, yeah. I find the same if someone asks me a question about anything really. Sometimes the answers are absolutely obvious, and it's mechanical. But if it's about something spiritual, then it surprises me, and often I will say something that I didn't know I knew. I didn't know that I understood, and I guess it's a bit like that. Is that how poems? You've said that poems are your teacher in some ways. Is that how it works? Because I feel that questions, if people ask me a question about something, then their question is my teacher.
Yes, I think it is like that. So they teach me in the form that they arrive, how they arrive, how they finish themselves, and I leave them. And then when I go back and I read them again, it's as if I'm reading them for the first time. And I think they teach me so much. They teach me, they remind me of my openness when they came along, but they're reminding me again of my openness now in reading them not from memory, but reading them fresh in this moment. And how can I be surprised about something that I've read twice, that I wrote and that I've read already? But I am.
Yes. I mean, but it's also the content, isn't it? Because poetry seems to have the capability to take you somewhere that ordinary words and logic can't take you. Somehow takes you beyond the mind. So does the content of your poems take you beyond the mind to that place of openness?
Yes, I think they...
When you read them again.
Yes,
because when I read your poems, they take me there. So.
Yes, I do fall in between the words. And what I love about poetry is, you have this form of a word that has a meaning in a dictionary. And with poetry, there's the freedom to play and to use that word in a surprisingly different way that's connected to the original definition, but is far away enough to kind of stretch things so that you fall beyond the mind. There's a play that's involved in poems and in how the words they allow themselves to be played with in that way.
Yes. I love the way you played with words that I gave you, and that formed the title of your latest book of poems. And that was quite a surprise for me, because it was certainly a stretch of the words, wasn't it? So it's called The Uncountability of Love, and it comes from my favorite mathematical theorem, one which I absolutely loved when I was a teenager, which was the uncountability of real numbers. And I was just entranced by it, and somehow you took that idea and stretched it to a whole book of poems.
It stretched itself, Jenny. You know, when you gave me that theorem, when I came to visit you once, and I was reading it on the train, I didn't understand it at all. But something about it caught me. Something about it caught me and didn't let go of me. And I knew at some point this would end up being on the book of something. Again, it's how did that happen? Why did you give it to me? Why did I come and visit you that weekend? You know, it couldn't have been any other way, but I didn't plan all of that.
Yes. Yeah.
And on that note, actually, as we're talking about maths, I really, in these last 2 years, started to understand the beauty of maths in a way that I had never appreciated when I was at school. I even did maths A level. If I were to do it now, I'm sure I would see differentiation as a really beautiful phenomenon. You know, at the time it was just logic and technical. But, you know, when Francis talks about pi, where does pi exist? How comes it has a tail that is infinite? You know, that's beautiful. It's beautiful.
Yes. And it's numbers like pi that make the real numbers uncountable, in fact. It is incredibly beautiful. Yeah. I don't think maths is taught the right way in schools, because it's taught too much through logic, and you don't feel the inspiration behind it. You don't feel the inspiration of who that the original developer of a particular proof felt. In that case, it was Cantor.
But it must have been a similar feeling to when some explorer hundreds of years ago discovered the Galapagos Islands, or, you know, they sort of knew that perhaps there was something there, and then, look at this, look at all these species, and look at all these plants, and you know, it must have been the same sort of the discovery.
It is. It's an amazing field of discovery, because it doesn't require. It's not like science where you require really expensive instruments or particle accelerators or things like that. You don't need anything other than just awareness itself. So perhaps we could end with one of the poems from that book, The Uncountability of Love, because there's one which for me really encapsulates that delicious spontaneity of living in not knowing. It's called An Ever So Nightly Sky. Would you like to read that?
I would love to read that. An ever so nightly sky. Afloat on my blue velvet sofa, my fingers back, writing again, asking for rain, so that they can tip-tap along with the rhapsody of everything, and have an excuse to do nothing else. Ah, I've missed this, the simple joy of not knowing and just watching the words appear like stars in an ever so nightly sky.
Thank you, Rachna. It's been lovely talking with you about your experience of living in not knowing and openness, spontaneity. And thank you, everyone, for listening.